And I'm doing my presentation on the Truth Commission in Argentina, focusing in on the history of the conflict and really like what led to the Truth Commissions themselves. So, to understand why Argentina got to this point, it's important to analyze, the past that Argentina had to go through. So we go into Argentina's troubled past. They had a long history of both military governments as well as political instability, starting in the 1930s. Military governments, which led to political instability. They went through over 6 coups throughout the 1930s until 1976. The first 4 coups established dictatorships, while the last 2 established permanent dictatorships that were much more difficult to topple than the previous 4. Many democratic governments dissolved as a result of the political turmoil that the country found itself in. And it's essential to understand that the social unrest that went along with the changes of power throughout this era, including political disagreements between those who supported the government and those that didn't, led to a lot of civil unrest. So it was usually disagreements between the ultra left and the ultra right. So that's the past. We should also kind of understand the 3 terrorist groups that existed in this time period. So economic and political unrest led to a lot of terrorist attacks and a lot of civil unrest, as I previously stated. When a country finds itself with economic trouble, a lot of the people often turn to violence to survive. The Montoneros, they were a terrorist group, and they stemmed particularly from followers of General Juan Perón, who was previously in power in Argentina until he was exiled, and then his wife Isabel Perón became president. And the Montoneros, believed in his ideologies, and although they were regarded as very progressive, they were very anti-American, and they were 25,000 strong. They had 25,000 people, and they hoped that Perón would return from exile in Spain and he'd transform Argentina into a true socialist fatherland. So again, very ultra left views. So then the AAA was the opposite of the Montoneros. They were an ultra-right death squad, and they were excessively active under Isabel Perón's presidency. And I say excessively because they completely disagreed with all of her views and all of her ideologies and policies that she tried to enact due to their leftist, leaning tendencies. And then there was the People's Revolutionary Army. They were originally very based in Marxist beliefs, but then transitioned more into Maoist-based organization. Again, believed in ultra-left ideals, and they opposed the actions that were being taken by the government throughout this time. Even though they were left, they just weren't, specifically what they wish they would see in their own government. So those were the 3 terrorist groups. And after President Isabel Perón was overthrown in a coup in 1976, a 3-man military junta filled the president, with Lieutenant General Jorge Rafael Videla mostly leading the junta, but it also included Admiral Emilio Massera and Brigadier Orlando Ramon Agosti. And this junta set out to establish a military dictatorship to move away from the actions of the previously tumultuous government. Again, so that transition of power, obviously not peaceful, and did not lead to a time of peace either. They began to control the public through a process which we'll later learn was called the process of national reorganization, and things they did included closing the National Congress, imposing censorship, banning trade unions, and bringing state and municipal government under military control. So even the smallest branches of government, the most local branches of government, were controlled entirely by the national, junta. So this time period became known as the Dirty War, and it lasted from March of 1976 to October of 1983, and it consisted mainly of the cleansing of opposing leftist views throughout the country, and it was justified by making it its mission to wipe out left-wing terrorism, but it in turn became a genocide, basically. Again, the left-wing terrorism it refers to was those three groups that we can just go back and take a look at. So, again, the Montoneros and the People's Revolutionary Army, as well as the AAA. So yeah, mostly the Montoneros, and their very pro-Peron ideologies and actions that they took to support that government were seen as a threat. And so people that liked those views and backed them disappeared. So 10 to 30,000 people disappeared throughout this time period. And again, as previously mentioned, it was known as the process of national reorganization. So here is a video kind of highlighting what went on throughout this time period.
The underground and in your...
Especially against wage restraint in face of huge inflation, and against the sweetheart relationship between their union leaders and the government.
Again, very anti-union.
Federal police moved in. 500 workers were sacked and 143 flung in jail without trial. Since then, union bully boys and police have continued to rub out troublemakers. One man handing out leaflets was machine gunned from a police car. Another shot dead while painting a slogan on a wall. Though the strike is long over, the violence continues. It was here on this dirt road that some railway workers discovered 3 bodies. One was that of a 29-year-old local lawyer, Dr. Concepcion de Grandis, and 2 of her clients. All 3 had been brutally murdered. They were filled up with lead, about 15 shots in each. Dr. de Grandis had disappeared about 24 hours previously from her office in the center of town. A car had arrived. Plainclothes police, armed to the teeth, had got out and taken her away, and that was the last time she was seen alive. Dr. de Grandis is not particularly well known either in legal circles or political ones, but there was one point of embarrassment in her record with the police, and that was that she was trying to serve on them a writ of habeas corpus to discover where some of her clients had disappeared to. The 2 other men had very little political form. One, although he was a shop steward, was also an evangelist, and he'd lost his job about a month previously. The second had no political connections at all. In the case of Dr. de Grandis, her eyes had been gouged out and her breasts cut off. She also may have been raped. As for the men, they were castrated. It would be idle to say that police investigations into this are getting anywhere, because they haven't even started. At least 750 people have died in political violence this year, though at an official level nobody keeps count. In fact, it is those who do keep count, who do ask questions about police banditry, about union murders and official corruption, who are themselves likely to end up in a ditch. Lawyers and journalists are high on the list.
They leave a message with the porter, for instance, and the porter says, oh, they were looking for you around here. They were asking what time you leave the house, when you come back. So...
What's the effect on you?
The effect is one of fear, very, very severe nervousness. You start changing the way you, the road, or the ordinary route you walk home on. Try to take a bus instead of a train, and it's all useless, because if they're out to get you, they'll get you anyway.
But you must work, you must live, you must go in, you must...
So again, those are just ways in which the public was affected by the Dirty War. That video was from the 70s, so it's kind of going into that time period. So again, the purpose of the process of national reorganization, as it was stated to the public, was to prevent terrorism and violence throughout the country, and the power and influence it held over actions taken throughout the country proved that it existed more so to ensure sustained power of the junta rather than to prevent violence. Again, thousands of people disappeared with no explanation and no investigation into their disappearances. So that actually led to the Mothers of the Plaza de Mayo. They were composed primarily of mothers of the victims of the Dirty War, actually exclusively of mothers of the victims of the Dirty War, who wore white scarves to identify themselves, and weekly vigils were held in the Plaza de Mayo at 3:30 every Thursday. This protest didn't end until 2006, but in this video, it highlights, the women that participated in it, and it interviews a few of them, so you can kind of see their attitudes towards it and their situation.
Our dear children and those dear mothers, the Argentinian Association of the Mothers of the Plaza de Mayo is commemorating its 35th anniversary of life, passion and struggle. The association was created during the days in which Argentina was subjugated by a military dictatorship that sadly left 30,000 arrested and missing people. These tireless fighters are united by the capability to transform the pain into a positive strength of life, freedom, truth, and social justice affirmation. I think there are some very strong things, like iron, bronze, marble, but nothing is stronger than the heart of the mothers. Nothing is stronger than the mother's heart. The beginning of the struggle began on April 30, 1977, when they decided to gather on the Plaza de Mayo, Buenos Aires, and started a peaceful public demonstration requesting to know the whereabouts of their missing children. To identify the mothers, they wear white head scarves with their children's names on them, to symbolize the blankets of the lost children. The white scarves became symbol of the mothers of Plaza de Mayo, who were trying to make public their reality. Now they are more than 80 years old. We never thought to get to this day. We never thought which was the way we were going to choose. We went out looking for our children, and we didn't find them, but assimilate all that they left, and why they gave their lives and became flesh and realized the meaning of fighting for human rights. The same force that from the first day, with disappointments and achievements always changing, but always without...
So, focusing in on the disappearances of their children. And later it was, analyzed that by separating children from their legitimate families, it had been one of the strategies of the military regime. And many of the kidnapped children, they'd been given to just other military leaders and just completely tearing families apart for what seemed like no reason. So the families who lost their children were families that, again, appeared to support Perón's government, and the junta believed that by taking their children and putting them in families that supported the junta's regime, these children would grow up in families that supported the junta and did not have, anti-military sentiment. So they wanted to create a generation of people that had no reason to dislike this particular regime that they led. So eventually, in 1983, there was the end of the Dirty War. After the cycle of economic instability continued in Argentina, it had been an ongoing cycle. Combined again with the loss of the Maldives and Falklands to Great Britain, the junta fell apart. So once more, another toppling of a government. Then President Raúl Alfonsín later pardoned the actions. President Raúl Alfonsín came into power, and he initially intended to prosecute everybody that was involved with the Dirty War and incarcerate them and just have them have like a fair trial and to just be punished. But he was later forced to pardon these actions of these military leaders. He was immensely pressured by other groups throughout the country, and this further affected Argentina's path towards a just democracy. Alfonsín then later resigned in mid-1989. He was succeeded by Carlos Menem, who served for 1 year, and who served for 10 years. He actually pardoned Videla and other top officers that were convicted of abuses as well. And although he was actually later charged with kidnapping of babies and giving them to military families himself, so he was sent to prison in 2008. So eventually there was justice for these families. But as a whole, the Dirty War was a time period that was marked by immense censorship and just can be seen as a complete product of the instability of the government of Argentina. The Mothers of the Plaza de Mayo can be regarded as one of the most successful peaceful protests of the century. They were really what drew attention to this particular area in this part of the world that was going through all these things. So